Hi. So it's been a little bit since I made one of these things, and not for lack of time. I've had plenty of time to do it. I just can't seem to organize my thoughts into something that can be coherent and helpful. Yesterday, I tried my first attempt at fasting. I went into this seriously. I went to bed early the night before. I didn't eat before bed. I woke up, only water, no caffeine. I'm a Mountain Dew person. I don't drink coffee, so it was no sugar, no caffeine, no nothing, just water. My initial goal was to set out for 24 hours, so it would have been from when I went to bed the night before until when I go to bed the next night. And if I could do it without eating, go to bed without eating. I only made it 16 hours for my first attempt. And one of the things I really learned is how dependent my body is on the world I live in. By 9 o'clock yesterday morning, I had a slamming caffeine headache. It certainly was not dehydration, it was all caffeine. But what I realized from this, other than it was uncomfortable, was that I am far more dependent than I thought I was. Far more. You know, when you see those memes about how we lived off the land for thousands of years and in 2 generations we lost the will and knack to do so? I found out just how dependent, how of the world I have allowed my body to become. It's rough. If you're thinking about doing it, I think you should plan ahead. I did it on a Saturday so that I would have today to reflect and contemplate on it, and as it turns out, recover from it. But I have heard people who I respect talk about longer durations and how they find a form of clarity while doing so. And that's what I was going for. But instead, I think I'll have to build up to that. And instead, what I got was some incredibly deep meditation. From 6 o'clock until 11 yesterday, so 5 hours, I was so far under that I could only recognize the headache I was having that was building in my head as sort of this superfluous thing that was just sort of happening. It's something you take the information in, you say that's what's happening, but it wasn't. It was terrible. It was a terrible headache, but while I was meditating, it wasn't. It was just another factor. So I went into this, as I said, I went into this trying to accomplish something. And when I got down into my meditative state, what I consider my communion with the universe, with God, it turns out that there was a plan I hadn't counted on. Because almost immediately the focus started to go on to tinnitus. The ringing, it's a medical state where there's a constant ringing in your ears. I couldn't bypass it for some reason. I've been bypassing it my whole life. But this time it was very difficult. So, if you know me, you know that I cannot accept a thing just because it seems like I should accept that thing. Everything I accept and know to be true has to be scrutinized. Even once it's an established truth, it is never not open to questioning. And if you know me, you know that I've had a singular struggle my whole life about my nature. Because I was raised to believe that my nature was corrupted, that I was evil by default, and that there was nothing I could do about that. So as I'm meditating on this, and the tinnitus is the focus because I can't seem to leave that focus alone, I start to wonder if what I've been told my whole life may not be true. That is that something is different about me. That inexplicably, unexplainably, there's something that is just vastly different about me as compared to previous generations, my history, where I come from. If that is the case, it's for me, I have to continually re-examine it. I have to give, even though at this point I have winnowed it down to have so much doubt in that, in the truthfulness of that, I still have to re-examine it. So I think to myself, what if this tinnitus, because I remember roughly when it happened in my life. I remember where I was living, where I slept, what were the initial symptoms, how did it come, how do we deal with it? What if it is a byproduct of my unwillingness to accept the truth? What if it is just something, see, people talk about a subconscious. People say, well, maybe it's your subconscious that is creating this in order to tell you or wake you up to something that you should realize. I find the argument of a subconscious very interesting to begin with, because you don't tell somebody like me. They have something called a subconscious that is secretly or behind the scenes in control of all of my desires, my direction, my goals. You can't tell me that I have something like that and not expect me to go rooting around for it. And if anybody could go rooting around for it, I have designed my life to be the person that could do that. I spend hours a day meditating. My house is like this, quiet, almost all the time. I have very few distractions when I'm working at home. If somebody is built for and has the environment to do so, it is me. I could look for that subconscious. And to be honest, what there is of a subconscious, if it is even that, I made friends with long ago. So it's not, tinnitus isn't a subconscious thing trying to alert me to something I have ignored. It is not that, because the struggle for me is, am I corrupted? Am I evil by default? And as it turns out, I don't think so. At least in regards to the tinnitus. I think that it is simply a measure of damage. Something went wrong. And for me, I've lived a life in construction. It has gotten worse over the years. It's incredibly loud. I remember when I was younger, that faint tone, that ring, that it was impossible to ignore because it was so new. And you have to train your mind to ignore things like that. And as I get older, I find that if I want to, I can shut down everything else and just listen to the ring. And it is incredibly loud now. Incredibly loud. And easy to ignore. Because I think it is just damage. So, why tell you about this? Why use this? Because I've sat here for an hour, just half meditating, letting my mind productively wander, trying to understand what it is I want to say about my experience yesterday. What understandings did I gain? See, I did a video earlier, not today, but like one of my last videos, in which I called myself a Christian. I claimed that I was a Christian. And that is something that is odd for my history. Even as I spoke it, I didn't speak it with a ring of like, ooh, I need to say something like this to manipulate. It was a conclusion I came to while filming. And as I've illustrated already, I can't do something like that without completely picking it apart and understanding every facet of it. Why did I say it? Is it true? Was I manipulating others? Was I manipulating myself? Was I trying to come to some sort of peace? And I agree that I am. In reflection, I've come to understand that I am a Christian, and I'd like to describe to you now why I believe that is the case. So, why would I bother with that? Why would I describe to anybody else, let alone on camera, why I have come to that conclusion? To what point is there for me to explain this to anybody? Part of my work is asking a question. Do you believe that it is possible that en masse humanity has missed the point of our existence and continually does so? Part of the reason why I am so skeptical about my faith, why I'm so critical, not skeptical, but critical, I have to examine it. I have to understand it. I have to know it to be true. Part of that skepticism is rooted in the fact that I was raised by fundamentalists. That my country has a lot of fundamentalist thinking wrapped in its culture. That part of the problems in the world is that a lot of the world has this fundamentalist basis for its existence, for its collective mind or consciousness. It is everywhere in this world. And if I ask, do you think it is possible for us to have missed the point, that fundamentalism has to be examined? I think the root of I'm going to make an assumption here that it is true that we have missed the point, and that in fundamentalism we have a trap, something that allows us to miss the point and then to build our belief systems upon it, to vote in favor of things that we agree to because of our fundamentalism, to go to wars, to have crusades, to create boundaries where one fundamentalist faith will have to go to the north or the south while the other fundamentalist faith stays in the north or the south. We divide, and then we war with each other. Because as much as people who live in the United States would like to think it, this is not the only place in the world. This is not the most influential place in the world. What is it about that fundamentalism? How is it that somebody could have what appears to be rock solid evidence in their hands, believe that rock solid evidence to be true, and yet still miss the point? And I think the answer comes down to that one term: deserve. Remember that deserve is how ego thrives in an environment of fear. And as far back in our history as we go, this is an environment of fear. What the macroevolution religion calls survival of the fittest, kill or be killed. As far back as our history goes, in this iteration of consciousness, fear has been the predominant element in our environment. We have things like bravery and the bravery it takes to go out into a wilderness and tame it, to make it to make its structure match what we need to make a more idealized world in our perspective. We've written songs and stories and founded Olympics and taught our children these things are important to us. If deserve is how ego thrives in an environment of fear, then that ego that is in all of us is one of the cornerstones to how we develop. You cannot believe that you deserve heaven, or you deserve hell, or others deserve heaven, or others deserve hell without that ego. That ego is what's driving all of that, whether it is what you deserve or what they deserve. And it is only happening because of the environment we're in, an environment of fear. I suspect fundamentalism's biggest trap is misunderstanding inspired word for dictated word. That, in other words, what they have in their hands, whether it's a Bible, Quran, or whatever, they describe as a source of truth. And the fundamentalists will look at that truth and take it word for word. I think the biggest evidence of this is biblically, it says that the most important trait for us to advance in God's will is charity. If I ask a fundamentalist why that is not given the most focus, they will tell me that charity doesn't mean what you think it means. It just means love. To make that argument, you need to be grounded in something that is feeding your ego. You have made connections. You have made literal transcriptions. Those connections you repeat in your mind. Remember, consciousness is an organic process, mimetically driven or fueled. You have taken something and you are using it to drive you. You minimize what is happening when charity is the most important by minimalizing what it means. And then you repeat that meme and it grows your consciousness. Your consciousness is growing one way or the other, whether you like it or not, and this is how you are choosing to grow it. That ego is fed because of deserve and because it exists in an environment of fear. This mistake cannot happen without the empathy of the subject being damaged already. To take a literal translation of something like this, and this happens all the time, whether they take out of context some Old Testament character or they are dealing with prophecies in Revelations, they are taking all of this out of context and using it to grow their consciousness. There's nothing wrong with that. The way God works is not through dictation. The way God works, his entire language is mimetic. If mimetics is that second replicator we've discovered, if that replicator was created in us to reflect our creator, that is how he speaks. That is how the universe speaks to beings that are being developed. I think that there are other obvious correlations here in that holy wars are only possible because we are taking what we think of as inspired to be dictated. So our translation, we repeat in our minds and we grow our minds with them. And somebody else has done the exact same thing, only differently. They've used something else to grow their consciousness. And we disagree, so there must be conflict. See, I don't think that this is enough for there to be conflict. I think if we look at history as a whole, almost all wars were done for material gain of property, gain of resources, gain of room to move. Somebody had something we wanted. We found a way to justify our actions in taking it. This continent was taken by people repeating memes a certain way in their mind, and most of them were fundamentalists. I don't mean that most of the bad shit that happened in this continent was because fundamentalists were repeating things like that. I think that people wanted things, and in order to get those things, they inspired people to do what they wanted. And this vulnerability, the vulnerability of fundamentalism, the idea that the word you are receiving is dictated, not inspired, that has led to a vulnerability. I think it's clearly obvious in the world I live in now that vulnerability is readily exploitable. That most of the power in this world understands how to exploit that vulnerability. And they are doing so very... I almost got off on a political tangent, and I need to stop those from happening. So I'm going to stick with the world. What do I see as far as our development is concerned? How is our progress glorifying God? See, for the fundamentalist Christian, there is a very big problem with this timeline, the 6,000 years of existence for the universe. What the problem the fundamentalists have, and I give you a really good example of that, is they believe they have the truth already. And it affected science. When science first started for us, that fundamentalist belief, those memes that we had been repeating, brought a lot of garbage to scientific inquiry. Things like ether, things like energies that we could not quantify or describe. And it led to scientists rationally thinking, hey, we need to stop this. So when the scientists said we need to stop this weird shit, like things that we cannot find, we cannot define, like the ether, when they strike it from their scientific thinking, immediately there's a problem with the fundamentalists, because these things are things they know to be true. To find scientific proof outside of something a fundamentalist finds as established fact starts the divide. And I've asked on several occasions to several sources, do you believe that there is anything like new revelation? And they don't. This led to one of the greatest problems science and faith have ever had. A man of faith, two men of faith, discover our first replicator. And in doing so, they establish a hard divide. What should have been inspirational, if not for the trap of fundamentalism, became a division between what was seen as scientific thinking, rational thinking, logical thinking, divided from the spiritual. You discover DNA, and it causes a crisis of faith. And the person who discovers it is looking for proof of the glory of God. But somehow, that discovery takes you further from the truth. If fundamentalism is a trap, this is one of the best illustrations of it. And that led to the second discovery of the second replicator discovered by Richard Dawkins. And that second replicator was only used to reinforce the mistakes we'd already made with the discovery of the first one. If you want to see magnificence, understand that it was Charles Darwin, the father of the religion that is macroevolution, the study of footprints that don't look like boots, leading to the second discovery in Richard Dawkins, which just reinforced the mistake. When these things, Like I've talked about these things before. I'm not trying to beat it dead. I'm not trying to just beat this into the ground here. Like I'm still in my mind. I am still repeating those political memes. I'm trying not to go down that way when giving this talk. Mental discipline on your own is an interesting function. Like, all right, so I'm trying to describe how it is I know what I believe to be true. How I know I have chosen a side. I know I am daily meditating on that side, how to advance us as a species using that understanding and that insight. So, for the fundamentalist Christians, we've got a 6,000 year storyline. For Julian Jaynes, who, in my understanding, is probably did the most work to describe what our consciousness was like prior to what it is now, what it was like before we understood how to grow our replicators, how to grow mimetically. He called it the bicameral mind. And with his work, he shows that our form of consciousness only really began growing around 3,000 years ago. I think that this is an iteration of consciousness, that both sides are wrong as far as the macroevolution. Maybe the Big Bang is a real thing. Maybe this universe has existed for 14, 16 billion years, and that is provable. The upside to that is that if scientific data is shown to dispute the age, whether make it longer or shorter, science is willing to make that change. We know, we are finding all the time on this planet, especially in South America these days and in Turkey, we are finding evidence of advanced civilization that predates 15,000 years ago, when the macroevolution religion says that we started agriculture about 10,000 years ago, and that was the beginning of our real story. I think 6,000 years is the start of this iteration. I think that there were iterations prior to ours. I think that is evident because if you look at our universe and then scale down to our solar system, what we have here in Earth is a place where a Dawkinsian good move could be made. This is a good place to start to inspire consciousness. In other words, if I am of a creator's mind, this is a good place to create consciousness in my image. And it has been for a good long time. We think somewhere around 10,000 to 20,000 years. It's been a good place for that. And maybe prior to the Ice Age, it was a good place then too. But I don't expect that this is the only place where it is a good move to develop conscious species. I suspect that any species whose mental replicator reflects our own, that is mimetics, where they come from is probably also a place that is a good move to establish conscious beings. I think that the records of this planet will probably in the end show that this is a good place to create the growth and development of consciousness, the creation of mind, and that there were other iterations before our own. Not that those iterations led to what we are now. They led to probably the one before led to the bicameral mind. The bicameral mind led to us as we know it today. So, how can I believe that and still call myself a Christian? When all the evidence from everybody I respect as an authority on the subject indicates that I am probably not with them. That what I see in this world is not reflected in the minds of other Christians. How can I still call myself one? What I see is an iteration of consciousness that was intentionally set in motion. And what I see in that Bible is a history of interaction from something far more powerful than us, interacting with us, and us just, well, we do it like humans do it. Everything we do, every big change we make, we seem to do the dumbest way possible for as long as it takes for somebody to just go, this is how it should have been done. That is how our iteration of consciousness is grown. And I think to myself in my work, I recognize the problems in the world today. I recognize that there are little switches inside human mind that, if found, focused, and flipped, can make a change in the individual. So I set out in my work to find those switches. But as it turns out, it's not an original thought. It is not my own original thinking. It was already conceived before me, and all I'm doing is recognizing the work that God is doing. What switch did God intentionally flip? All of that energy, all of the energy at his disposal to make and bring the existence of Jesus into this world. What was it like for a man with the understanding and knowledge of God to exist and watch us fumble around, clearly missing the point? What was all that energy dedicated to? Why? What switch was it that God was looking to flip in our species? And I have said, as I've said before, that switch was empathy. The introduction, the example of empathy. And how long does it take a switch like that? Because when I look for the switches, when I look for a way to inspire somebody else, I wonder how that will take root. How do I flip the switch, allow it to take root in another mind, and then inspire them to do something with it? And as it turns out, this switch that God flipped for us was empathy, and it's taking around 100 generations or 2,000 years for us to finally grasp it. Not only 2,000 years and 100 generations, but look at the technology we are flooding behind this. How much has the growth of empathy in the human mind grown with simply the introduction of the internet? My ability to speak to you no matter where you are. There is a lot of focus in the memetics of this world right now about how there is an awakening. The name of this channel is Awakenings Are Weird. And on this channel, I will tell you that wokeism is another religion. How can I call my channel Awakenings Are Weird and then come out against wokeism? Maybe it's just a problem with branding. Now, I think that it is true that I am a Christian because I understand the work that Jesus was trying to do in introducing empathy to us. To try and break that trap that is fundamentalism. To try and break that trap that is the refutal or the refusal to agree with those who are fundamentalists. Because the fundamentalists aren't only a problem, it's the people who refute fundamentalism that are also the problem. There is no way to merge these things. You choose a side. The fundamentalists choose a side, and that instantly narrows down the magnificence of their creator. If this entire universe was built and created by an individual consciousness, an individual mind, an individual being, that individual is far larger than you are recognizing. Yeah. What is it that the Christians believe then? That we are sinful, that we alone cannot change that fact, that we need redemption, and the work of Jesus was to redeem us. The only way for us to find redemption is through Jesus, and Jesus' work was the introduction of empathy. That is the grounds in which I call myself a Christian. I don't think it's the only way. What I mean by that is, I don't think it was the only attempt at growing our minds. I think there were many, many attempts. And it has allowed for many different forms of fundamentalism in different regions of this world, or in the same region. In my little town in the middle of Wisconsin, I can have fundamentalists from many different sides of the argument, whether they be fundamentalist macroevolutionists, fundamentalist Christians, or Muslims. They can all exist right here, and they also exist regionally on this planet. I think fundamentalism is a trap. I think this constantly flipping back and forth to justify one belief system, I think that is the trap. That is ego being satisfied in an environment of fear by utilizing deserve. And all of this started out with my attempt at fasting and meditation combined. All of this came from my attempt to understand the ringing in my ears. I don't think we understand communion with God properly. Because there's a difference between when I pray because of something I think should happen, or praying to hope something happens, and actual communion with something more powerful than yourself. Because it's not dictation, it is mimetic. That is how God influences. The still, calm voice in the storm. Thank you for your time.